When I first started working as a grant writer a few years ago, I started at a place that provided psychological counseling. At the time, the only things that I knew about psychology were what I learned from a couple of classes that I took in high school and college. My boss wanted me to learn more about mental illness and how therapy worked, and so he sent me to get trained and certified in all sorts of different types of mental health care. Throughout my time as a grant writer, I was certified in a lot of different things. But there was one training in particular that profoundly changed the way that I approach writing fiction: motivational interviewing. Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepke, and today we are going to practice writing without preaching. Many of my stories are meant to change the way that people think about the world, and motivational interviewing was handmade in heaven for writers like me. A lot of times when writers are trying to tell a story with a purpose in mind, we have a really bad habit of trying to beat our readers over the head with the correct answers. We preach to them about what's right and what's wrong, and in doing so, we typically create very bad stories. Rather than provide the right answer, we should use the same ideas for motivational interviewing that help people change their lives for the better, to lead our readers on a journey that helps them question their deeply held beliefs and gives them the space to come to a new conclusion on their own. Main characters aren't the only heroes involved in a story. Our audience members are the heroes of their own story. And the books we write are the journeys that they go on to overcome their own tragic flaws. Motivational interviewing is a practice that uses non-judgmental questions and in-depth interview techniques to help motivate a change in thought so that people can make positive life changes. There's a lot of science behind it, but there's one phenomenon in particular that is really relevant here: the backfire effect. When someone is told information that contradicts their deeply held convictions, their beliefs get stronger. Like when someone tells me that I need to stop eating sugar, and I'm like, but pandas eat way more sugar than I do and they seem fine. Regardless of how the pandas are doing, and setting aside my obvious addiction to sugar, our brains are wired to protect our deeply held beliefs from all intruders. If you think about that in terms of psychology, it means that when there's a person who has convinced themselves that bad behavior is fine in order to excuse themselves from wrongdoing, outright telling them that they're wrong will not help them change. It will make them lean more heavily on the belief that what they are doing is fine. And if you've read my latest book, then you know what being fine will get you. Motivational interviewing doesn't try to tell people what to do or think. It aims to guide them along a path where they can objectively examine their deeply held beliefs and identify inconsistencies in their thought process. Once they see on their own that there's a flaw in their logic, then they can be encouraged to change to achieve healthier goals. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the path that your main character takes to overcome their own tragic flaw. They have to do all of the wrong things first before seeing that they were wrong. Only then can they transcend. Now, I will be the first to admit that this lesson doesn't pertain to all writers. Not everyone has a lesson in mind when they start writing their stories. A lot of writers only tell stories to be entertaining. If that's you, then you're fine, keep up the good work. But the rest of this video isn't going to be terribly helpful for you. Maybe not the first part either. Should I have put this earlier? Well, at least you got to learn about motivational interviewing and the backfire effect. That's pretty cool, right? If this lesson isn't terribly helpful for you, but you still want to learn how to use concepts in psychology in your fiction writing, then check out my video about how to use the 7 stages of grief to include emotion in your stories. Anywho, using the thought processes behind motivational interviewing to tell a story doesn't need to be used in everything that's written. It really should only be used in the times when you're trying to change the way that somebody sees the world or change their mind on a topic. If those are your goals for your story, then please keep watching because you're going to get a lot out of this. Motivational interviewing is all about asking questions, providing affirmation, reflecting ideas, and summarizing the discussion. The way that we use these ideas in fiction writing, which doesn't allow for face-to-face communication, requires a little bit of adaptation. Let's start with asking questions. In fiction writing, the questions can't be asked directly. That would be too easy and also really dull for our readers. So we use things like theme, metaphor, simile, and other writing conventions to say things without actually saying them. Instead of us asking questions of our readers, we're trying to get our readers to ask questions of the story. When readers question the story, they are indirectly questioning themselves and their own beliefs, because that is how we interpret stories. We can't ask the author why he wrote in detail about a giant billboard with eyes staring out over a city of ash. So we ask ourselves what meaning it has. Then we use our own understanding of the world to answer that question. Personally, I think that sometimes the color green is just the color green, but you do you, Fitzgerald. Motivational interviewing requires open-ended questions that give clients the room to think through their thought process and examine their personal goals and beliefs. In writing, we can only ask open-ended questions with our prose. The problem comes later in the fact that we can't hear a direct answer from our audience. But we'll let future us handle that. For now, let me show you what I mean. Let's say you're writing a children's story where you're trying to teach children that the bathtub isn't a scary place. You start by creating a main character who acts as an avatar of the audience, a child who is scared to take a bath, but whose parents won't let him play until he takes one. No matter how many times their parents tell them that the bathtub is safe, the child is too scared even with the promise of playtime, the thing he wants most, hanging on the other side of bath time. Now we'll ask a question of the audience by having the avatar imagine all of the scary things that could be inside of the bathtub. Since it's a children's story, we'll use silly and fantastical imagery so that we won't scare them more. We'll have the child worry about monsters in the tub. By showing the avatar's worries, we're asking the audience about their own worries. What is it about the bath that's scary? In motivational interviewing, you'll typically ask one open-ended question followed by 3 reflections. A reflection rephrases a statement made by the client in order to get to the heart of their meaning. If someone says, "I hate cats because they're evil," you might say, "So you don't like cats because they're scary or there's something wrong about them?" This gives the client the opportunity to think about their own feelings and make adjustments so that they can clarify their meaning. It also helps them get a better understanding of themselves. A client might respond, "No, not really. They're cruel. You know, they kill things for fun." From this point, the client has helped you understand them better, but they've also clarified and minimized their depictions of cats as evil. The interviewer can make a couple of more reflections to help further define the reason that the client doesn't like cats. It's definitely a misunderstanding. I mean, look at that face. In fiction writing, the reflections we make are more like predictions of our audience's thought process. Since we can't talk to them directly, we have to make non-judgmental assumptions about where their thoughts might go while reading the story. This can be difficult to manage. It's why I typically advocate for reading up on psychology and listening to conversations that happen around you. You can learn a lot about people just by listening. Once you people watch long enough, you start to realize that everybody is pretty much the same, just raised in slightly different environments that generate a wide variety of results. In our children's story, let's take the reflections one at a time. The child thinks that there's a monster in the bathtub. First, we'll go through all the different monsters that it could be. It could be a sea monster, maybe it's a minotaur, or it could be a boogeyman. We'll ask these questions until we get to the core of the child's problem. The avatar thinks the bath sounds like a roaring lion. Once we get to this point, we know why the child doesn't want to take a bath. He's afraid of the sound. Next in the story, we need to summarize. Summarization is actually just an active listening skill. You restate the things that the client said so that you're both clear that you understand what's going on in the conversation. In summarizing, you're also going to point out anything that doesn't add up between what the client is doing right now and what they need to do to reach their goals. In our children's story, summarizing might be done by the parents of the avatar as they provide comfort to the child. They would acknowledge that they know he's scared and they now understand why he's scared. From there, they might point out that he often plays with his toy lion, who roars very loud. In this way, the parents are acknowledging what the child said and bringing up the child's goal of playing while connecting it to his fear of the bath. This is a reason to cause the avatar and the audience to question, if roaring is okay during playtime, why is it scary in the bathtub? That question might actually lead to more questions and more reflections that eventually lead the child to the thought process that if roaring is okay during playtime, then when the bathtub roars, maybe it's okay for him to roar back. Maybe he could even bring his toys to the bathtub and pretend that they're the ones who are roaring. This brings us to the final part of motivational interviewing, which is affirmations. Affirmations are compliments or statements of affirmation that validate the client and highlight their strengths and efforts to change. In fiction writing, this is very simply rewarding the avatar for overcoming obstacles. In our children's story, the avatar is led along a path where he finds solutions for his own problem. Once he finds something that works for him, his parents congratulate him for being brave and creative. They hug him, kiss him, and even buy him a new toy lion for the bathtub. In the end, he'll have so much fun in the bathtub that he ends up with a new problem. Now, his parents can't get him out of it. People thrive on recognition and praise. Rewarding people when they do the right thing is actually a lot more effective in eliciting positive change than punishing them for failing. However, it takes a lot more recognition and praise for a lesson to stick than it does for punishment to create fear. People remember bad things a lot more clearly than they remember the good. But if you shower people with enough good things along the journey to positive change, then they will always want to come back for more. Of course, children's stories are a lot more upfront about lessons than stories for adults. The same principles still apply, of course, but it has to happen along a cycle of change. In motivational interviewing, the cycle of change includes 5 stages. Pre-contemplation, also known as the stage where they aren't ready for change. Contemplation, where they're thinking about changing. Preparation action, where they're making active steps to change. Maintenance, where they've changed and they're trying to maintain the momentum to continue this new lifestyle. And relapse, where they return to one of the previous stages and have to continue along the cycle all over again. The cycle of change should sound pretty familiar to you because it's basically a depiction of how a good story works. Someone starts out in a place of comfort, something changes and they have to decide how to move forward. They step out into the new world, they learn to cope with the new world, and they face obstacles that set them back on their journey. They keep running against these obstacles until eventually they're able to overcome them and change for the better. In a story for adults, you would need to follow along the steps for motivational interviewing while keeping in mind that your character needs to relapse probably 2 or 3 times before the story is over. That means you need to keep using your story to get your audience to ask themselves questions, reflect those answers back at them, and have the reflections evolve over time as their responses become more precise. Summarize what the avatar has gone through, and then reward them for small changes that they make along the way. And then you have to keep doing that until the story is over. Most importantly, you have to remember to never make your avatar seem stupid for not understanding or believing the thing that you want them to believe by the end of the book. It's all about guiding your audience to see the inconsistencies in the way that they think about the world so that they can make changes on their own. Remember that it's not about you. When you're trying to tell a story that's going to change people's minds about the world, it's easier to be a counselor than it is to be a preacher. You can point out facts and evidence all you want, but until you let go of the reins and allow your audience the freedom to examine their own hearts, you're never going to get anybody to change. Writing purposeful fiction is not about explicitly stating the right answer to a problem. It's about helping the audience realize that there's a problem in the first place. If you like looking at how psychology can help us tell stories, check out the video on top where I tell you all about how to use the 7 stages of grief to add emotion into your story. Otherwise, click on the bottom video to see what YouTube recommends. As always, thank you so much for joining me today on CC Writes. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and I will see you later.